Hello, distinguished colleagues across town and across the globe. It's November 10, 2016. I'm Paul Colby, and I'm your host for another surrealistic edition of Public Affairs Public Access. If you're a regular viewer, you know that when I come into your living room or wherever it is that I'm being watched, I take you behind the scenes and I share the news that you haven't heard, and I report on rumors behind the stories about the rumors in the news and other stuff. So we have lots to cover as usual. You might want to fasten your seat belt. Tonight, we're going to discuss the 2016 elections in the USA, top to bottom. Big picture overview. The majority party candidate who apparently won the popular vote was not elected president. Not the first time that's happened. In exit polls, 60% of the voters questioned said that the winner was not qualified to hold office. It's been estimated that roughly 75% of eligible voters were disgusted with both the major party candidates, and that roughly the same number want to see viable alternatives to the so-called two-party system. All of that said, some folks in America are very elated tonight, and some folks in America are deflated. Happy voters are expressing hope for the future. If there's some around you, you've probably heard comments like these that you picture here. Glad to be a forgotten American again, and time to lock people up, and let's have Mexico pay for it, and it's the happiest day of my life, and we'll party down, and well, you know, we can call in sick tomorrow. That's what you're hearing on one side of the fulcrum. Well, it's not a fulcrum really, it's a spectrum. But on the other side, there are people who are stunned and despondent, and here's what it's like for them. Is this a county hotline? Yes, I'm trying to find out where my voting precinct is. What? Shower stall. What shower stall? Mine?
Come right in.
For your protection, your vote will be recorded.
Please study the ballot on your shower stall wall. What in the hell is going on here? Please say the name of your choice for president.
What? I don't want to vote for any of these people. Oh, this campaign must finally be getting to... I know, I'm having a dream. I'm having a nightmare. That's it. It'll be over when I wake up.
You have selected Donald Trump.
No, I didn't. This isn't really happening. Let's just get a grip.
Now pick an artist to induct into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I don't like any of these people.
You can choose one side order.
I can't believe this is happening. This is not happening.
What would you rather be doing?
I'd rather be mowing my hair or something. You know?
Thank you for voting. It was a pleasure tooling you.
Yeah. That's why some people, half the country, are thinking about moving to California or Nevada or Massachusetts, for reasons we'll discuss a little bit later. But let's now just dissect this entire campaign bit by bit. This year, there was a whole lot of talk about potential voter fraud, irregularities, all sorts of things were talked about. Did they really happen? One of the first things you heard about from the Trump side was that dead people were voting. That's not exactly a new election charge, but let's see what it really is about. For one thing, it is possible for dead people to have voted, and that explains one of the things that may have gone on this year. If you didn't notice this recent headline, about 7 million people who voted early died in a plane crash recently. The plane, well, it was the Trump Airlines Flying City. It crashed into a meteor. In any case, these people are now dead, but they did actually vote. There's another version of dead people voting in the sense that if they don't upset what happened in the election, it's not a big deal. And we have seen recent reports, I'm thinking of one particularly in the Greater Montana Revealer, that said most of the dead voters this year, who may legitimately be dead long before the election, actually voted for people other than Clinton and Trump. In fact, some of them seem to have voted for Herbert Hoover, thinking about the good old days. So this dead people voting idea, not a big deal as far as I'm concerned. But there were also charges about rigged voting. The whole election is rigged, okay? I don't see the point here. There are precincts that Donald Trump said you have to go watch because there's going to be some fraud going on. As a matter of fact now, those precincts didn't have too many events, and most precincts around the country were guarded. Let me explain what that means. Here in Texas, for example, we have open carry, but people were told they could not bring guns to the polls even if they were acting at the behest of Donald Trump's instructions and going to protect democracy. But there were other weapon systems available at precincts close to mine that guaranteed nothing was going to get out of hand. There were also discussions about people voting more than once. Now, in the old days, that would have meant somebody went to one precinct and then came back a few hours later or went to another precinct to vote, but we don't live in that old age anymore. We live in a modern age, and there are new ways to vote multiple times. So there was a potential issue. I think we have a video here. I saw it on the internet recently. A gentleman is explaining how he was able to vote multiple times. Let's run that. Yes, the vote multiplier works with any conventional oven system. First thing you will do, you will connect to the remote internet voting site, which I have already done. And now I simply go to the oven. It doesn't matter whether it's clean or dirty. And I just have to tell Siri who I want to vote for and how many times. So Siri, I need to vote for Hillary Clinton 6 times. And can you confirm for me? Here we go. And now it confirms it. That's how it works, ladies and gentlemen, flawlessly. Now, remember, I have already voted for Donald Trump 24 times, so it's not going to mess anything up. But that is how they are trying to rig our election systems. You heard it first here, probably. That's how they do it. And actually, the software is not that expensive. The application, excuse me, for your iOS or Android device is not that expensive. As far as the outcome goes, well, the gentleman, he pointed out to you that he'd already voted 24 times for Donald Trump. So if there was voter multiplication, I think we know what direction it went in. This year, there was also a lot of talk about Russian influence in our election. Were they messing with our heads, okay? Well, there's been a undercurrent, if you want to call it that, about Russian influence for some time, going back for months. In fact, there's a book you may have seen in your local bookstore, and you may not have picked it up, but it's called Niet Profit. It's by Dr. Moo Fibermilk, and it's basically suggesting that America would be better off if we were more like the Russians of today. And by the way, it has some darn interesting recipes in it. That's what I mostly liked about the book. But let's go a little bit further. There are some things you probably aren't aware of, and one of those involves Russian interference, so to speak, at the Republican National Convention. I happen to have recorded this when it was going on. It was very late at night, almost no one was watching anymore, but the state of Leningrad offered its electoral votes at the Republican National Convention, and I still have that video. Let's have a look at that.
Chairman, the great state of Leningrad, home of the pelican-sized cheeseburger, cast all of its 71 electoral votes for the next president of the United States, Comrade Donald Trump.
You probably didn't know that. But why did we have this discussion about the Russian influence in the first place? Well, let's back up a little bit. The DNC's emails and the Clinton Foundation emails and Clinton's emails were all hacked. The Democratic elite automatically blamed the Russians for it, okay? And that's why the subject came up, because of the perceived influence of the Russians in hacking the DNC and the Clinton emails. Well, of course, that came to not very much of anything, because the FBI, not once but twice, let Hillary off the hook. You probably saw the news coverage recently in the Washington Woofer talking about the Clinton emails. There was apparently some bathroom humor in some of them, and some, water cooler jokes, but nothing particularly exciting. That's what the FBI thinks, and there may be something political going on there. But let me take this a bit further. Does the fact that the Russians are trying to influence or mess with our election mean that they're the ones who actually hacked the DNC? We've been over this bridge before, but I'm going to update you on the issue, because I just had a startling interview yesterday with a very, very well-known hacker, Mr. Morris Fern. Fern is the guy who popularized the phrase, "Hack Lives Matter," to some extent. But in case that name sounds vaguely familiar to you, it's because back in 1953, Morris Fern is the guy who invented the pantsuit. Yes, sirree. Well, what he told me was that he and a few fraternity brothers are the ones who hacked the DNC. They did it very easily, and they didn't have to do anything more than go to the App Store for iPhones or for Androids and purchase a little piece of software called DNC Hack. Now, you too can go down there and download anybody's dirty laundry. In fact, it says here in the internet ad I found yesterday that there's a new version coming for RNC hacking if you want to do that. So is the charge that the Russians are responsible for the hacking holding water today? I don't think so. I don't think so. But let's move forward. Whether there was Russian influence, whether the Russians hacked the DNC, we came to the end of the line and the people voted for the Donald. That's what they did. But if you look at the exit polls, you'll find that what the CNN and NBC and ABC and CBS fellows are telling you about this year's election motive, it doesn't really jive with the truth. I was able to get a copy here. You can see that it's classified of the original exit polling summary that all the networks have, and the real reasons for the votes are pretty distinct from what you have been told on television. For example, polite offspring apparently is an important feature for America's current voters, or being a good dancer. That seems to be important, or having good teeth. None of those things are being talked about very much in the mainstream news, but there you have it. You can look at it yourself. Now, the aspect of almost all recent elections that gets questioned the most is, why do we have the Electoral College do this, and why do we not have a popular vote kind of a system? The New York Whisperer talked about that because there has been talk that the Electoral College vote might be rigged. In other words, Donald is still worried that when push comes to shove, somebody may try to take that vote mandate away from him. Well, he also appears to have some colleagues, if you want to call it that, on the Electoral College, as do the Clinton Foundation folks. So the Electoral College issue is kind of dead in the water right now, because even if there had been a challenge to the election or a challenge to the Electoral College version of who wins, it's been pointed out that the Supreme Court is not willing to rule on any election challenges this year. The Austin Self-Promoter had an article about that recently. It's pretty illuminating because it also talks about the right to bear laws, and it says that the court also won't hear any cases on the benefits or lack of benefits of chemtrails. Now, why is that interesting in this campaign season? Well, if you have been looking at the InfoWarts internet presentations lately, you know that Alex is getting riled up about chemtrails and chemtrail spraying, and according to him, you see the chart that calls it seeding votes for Clinton. Alex has a theory that those chemtrail sprays are dropping particles down to earth that cause Democratic and independent voters to lose their sense of focus or to vote against their own self-interest. It looks to me like Alex may have gotten this one backwards, because whoever was in a brain fog in the voting booth didn't punch that lever for Hillary Clinton. So that's what went down. Since that's the decision of the American electorate, so to speak, at least half of it in this case, we now know that Clinton will not be pushing her agenda. So let's see what we have avoided by electing Donald Trump. Number one, you know that the Clintons took a lot of money from big money sources, large corporations, including, for example, the fossil fuel industry. So even though they had talked about opposing TPP and backing off from fracking, I'm sure they were planning to redo that policy position once they got into office. And in fact, here's a WikiLeaks memo that we've been able to draw up for you, and it says precisely that. What they were going to do, they were going to continue fracking, but they were going to give it a new name. And some of these new names are pretty amazing. They were going to call it the banana-free modulation technique. I like that. Or the horizontal rock renovation motif, or the lots of water fun shake-up tool. But I don't know if that would have fooled a whole lot of people. They seem to think it would. Next thing that Clinton was probably going to do, according to information I have and information that was published in the San Antonio Silencer, they were going to reward their colleague Bernie Sanders with a very important coveted post, i.e. the ambassadorship to San Marino. Now, you may not have heard of San Marino, but I guarantee if you do a Google search, you'll find that there are actually about 30,000 people living in a place called San Marino. I think they're pretty friendly, so Bernie would probably get along with them, but there aren't any telephones or computers or ways for Bernie to actually be in communication with the rest of the government, and that seems to have been the real motive. Clinton also talked about making college affordable, so there had to be ways to do that, and everybody knew it was going to be expensive. We have another leaked memo that says how they were approaching that. They said, for example, we didn't say what kind of college education we were going to provide. It says here that the Clinton Foundation actually bought up a whole bunch of barber colleges, and they're thinking of maybe sending people there, even though that may not have been what people had in mind when they wanted to go to the university. And they intended to have the IRS apparently seize Trump University, and they were going to make use of that. Interesting. They also were talking about extending and improving Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. We never did hear exactly what they were going to do, but I got a copy just the other day. You know how resourceful my staff is. A secret internal briefing book on a tentative proposal for a single-player healthcare casino lottery system. And I think what this was about was some kind of a system that would reward some people who were lucky enough to get, well, anyway, we still haven't figured out what that was. Anyway, the Clinton agenda is not going to go forward. The Trump agenda is what's going to go forward. So let's think in terms of what Trump has in the way of priorities. Number one, that wall. Now, he keeps insisting that he's going to build it, but he's also talking about improving our economy and bringing the budget under control, that sort of a thing. And so he's been looking around for, if you will, spare parts he can use. He checked into taking over the custody of the Berlin Wall. Apparently he didn't know that it's already been taken apart, and it's mostly parcelized out into some art museums all over the world now. So he, as I say, he's looking at spare parts that he can use, but he's still talking about the wall going up, and in fact this time the wall is getting wider and larger and so forth, and many people will be able to work there. That's the idea. But the main reason for the wall, you know, it was this problem with illegals coming into the country, okay? And so the idea was, well, we're going to deport 11 million people. That, you know, that's a little impractical, a little expensive. It assumes that we have 11 million law enforcement people to go out there and get the ball rolling on that. And so secretly, the Trump campaign has been planning a different approach that involves Area 52. Do you know what Area 52 is? It's pretty top secret, so you probably don't. But the military, the U.S. military, has apparently been cultivating a lot of prospects on the moon for some time. Area 52 is an ancillary to Area 51, but it's on the moon, and American entrepreneurs, including guess who, Don Trump, have already been there too, and they are working on a moon palace. In fact, it probably is just about ready to open. So, that being said, what are they planning to do with the immigrants, those illegal, dangerous aliens, the rapists, etc. According to a memo that I have, they are planning to trick them into going up for a weekend at the Moon Palace, which is right there by Area 52, and they're not going to realize that they're on a one-way trip to a detention center off planet. Isn't that fascinating? And I don't know how they were able to keep it secret, except that our own media is so lazy that it was sitting right there in front of them. Trump agenda continued. You know how he thinks about certain aspects of science? Well, that means some textbooks are going to have to be changed. Textbooks not only for high schools and grade schools, but for colleges. And I recently have seen lots of people reading on the bus to work or on the subway or while they're driving their cars, which they shouldn't be doing. They're reading the new book by K. Harry Diphthong, which is about, let me quote this, China's sick global warming hoax and the future of huge hotel renovations. Fascinating book. And this one also, like the book about Niet, the book about Russia, also has some bang-up recipes in it. But you know, Harry Diphthong, he's written other books too. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, I remember now. He wrote Hotels on the Moon. Now, isn't that surprising? The future we yelp for. A work of piety and depravity that makes hot dogs into great pieces of music. And Donald Trump said that. So, immigration situation. There is another big priority. Now, you know this debate that we've been having about transgenders using bathrooms? Well, the way to deal with that, according to Trump insiders, is to get rid of bathrooms. And they have a study, a scientific study, so-called scientific study. Let me quote this important point. In general, we have determined that boys and girls can hold it much longer than is generally believed. In other words, they don't need bathrooms at high schools, so no transgender bathroom problem. We just get rid of the bathrooms. Now, another of the memos that I've seen talks about the TPP aspect of this, and it's actually talking about teepees. Oh yeah, I see. Building teepees outside of the high schools. Well, anyway, so be it. Now, other issues to think about here. We are told that they are going to replace Obamacare. We don't know exactly how, but something has leaked. The San Francisco Trumpeter got wind of this. Like actually, my people gave them a tip about this. One of the supporters of Donald Trump, Mr. Sigvard Plateau, told the NRA, an assembly of NRA members, that sick people are a drag on the economy, and they also announced a free health care plan for deplorables. Now, this meant people who had self-identified as deplorables before November 2016, not just anybody gets in on this free health care. And of course, there's a question, how do you pay for this free health care? Well, obviously, if we're eliminating bathrooms all over America, there's some found money. Found money. Next, though, question about the Supreme Court. That's been talked about all through this campaign, and we know Donald Trump is ready to automatically get on the ball with that one. There's a book by one of his supporters who may turn out to be one of the best prospects for a Supreme Court position. That's Dr. Moo Fibermilk. You've probably heard his name earlier on this program. He's got a book called Grab 'em by the Commandments, and it talks about the Constitution as a deceased document. What can we make of it? What can we make it say, and when can we make it say it, sort of? That's the kind of person we really need on the Supreme Court right now, but there's another angle to this. You know that the big charge among half of the country has been that Donald has no qualifications for the office that he's just been elected to. And so some of the Trump advisors are thinking the same way about Supreme Court nominations. In other words, a person doesn't need to have any particular experience to be nominated. And so I am told that Chuck Berry and Tom Brady are in the running right now, along with some of the Kardashians, or all of them. They might sit as one justice. Final comment about the Trump agenda, that involves our depleted military. Now, you know, I've said before on this show, our bloated military budget is bigger than the next 10 military spenders combined, so one wonders where the depletion is, but apparently in the Trump camp, the goal is that instead of just spending more than the next 10 spenders, we're going to spend more than the next 50, and we've already spent 50% of our budget on military and our domestic surveillance, etc., so they're going to kick that up a little bit higher. So much for the Trump agenda. It wasn't just the presidential race that was interesting this year. There's also a bunch of propositions out there that people voted on. And, you know, the big complaint that I always have about propositions is that they're misleading. And it's hard to tell what they're actually talking about. Let me give you as an example. You see it up here on the board. Proposition 14 in Utah. This says that it's talking about a change. Shall the Constitution be amended to ensure that hunting and fishing enthusiasts have access to information regarding the home addresses of certain authorities who have written articles or books discussing whether studies of agricultural production and ranching practices should be financed by third parties with a seething contempt for conventions of the English language as currently spoken by friends, and, well, it goes on and on. So my question to you is, what is this about? If I were looking at this proposition, I think I would vote whatever. But you know, these things are not just confusing in language terms. These days they're getting more visceral and angry. I suppose that is the tone of just about everything in American politics these days. And let me give you an example. Proposition 6 here from Wyoming. The state constitution shall be amended to clarify that the right of people to use bear arms, legs, etc., 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 or creating the appearance of disturbance, and it says that might or could possibly anger, entice, distract, disarm, immobilize, vaporize, blur, augment, redirect, loosen, freeze, rewire, demean, undo, fill out, knock down, call into question, and that goes on. To me, that sounds more like the Patriot Act than anything, anything reasonable. So that's pretty confusing. But think about this, ladies and gentlemen. In addition to the deliberate confusion that you see in many of these proposals, there is also accidental confusion. And I want to talk about accidental confusion referring specifically to Proposition 60 in California, which you may have heard of. California's Proposition 60 concerns the use of condoms in pornographic films. So, without even reading the specific language of that proposal, you would be prudent to assume that it has something to do with health issues or health safety or working conditions, something like that. Well, you'd only be partly right, because this was really a typographical error that wasn't caught in time, and what the proposal was really about, as you'll see here, was the use of condominiums in pornographic films. So what is really going on here, and what the motive behind this apparently was, is that there is or was a lot of unused or unrented condominium space out there in California, the home of pornographic movies, and this was more or less a business sort of proposition, you know, Chamber of Commerce sort of thing about boosting certain economic sectors by making them film adult movies in condominiums. I guess before they were largely filmed in garages or, you know, hotels rented or people's homes, something like that. Anyway, that's pretty fascinating. Other things that were on the ballots that people were deciding, a lot of them, as I said before, involved marijuana, and that's now going to be appropriately used for recreational purposes in California and Nevada and Massachusetts. It failed in a couple of other places, but people are not necessarily reading the fine print. It does not mean that you can necessarily smoke marijuana. It just means that it is being used for recreational purposes. So here we have from the National Security Agency a slide showing one of the proposed marijuana recreation sites. This is somewhere in California. Apparently this is some sort of a bungee jump. You can see at the top there's a jumping platform that we can't quite see, and down there in that cylinder block of some sort is a huge bed of marijuana plants. And apparently only the bravest of jumpers will attempt to jump into that apparently soft enough bed of marijuana, but that's just one example of the proposed recreational uses. There are other recreational uses, I suppose, that we're not going to know about until they're ready to come online, so to speak. Now, also in California, there was a proposition that dealt with increasing the taxes on cigarettes by a couple of bucks. Now, a lot of people were confused by this as well. And why were they confused? Well, if you think about it, somebody who is being asked to pay more for the product, you know, the conventional cigarette, assumes that he's going to get some more, and a lot of people thought there was an overlap between the proposition legalizing marijuana and the one making cigarettes more expensive, but they're not the same cigarettes. They're not the same cigarettes. There are other propositions out there. For one, and I've lost my index to where this is supposed to have happened. There was a new definition, a legal definition of is. Now that's going to change a lot of, well, for example, legal papers. It's going to change the meaning of a number of novels. It's going to change instructions at grocery stores and gasoline stations, and it's going to change the way that people deal with other people, frankly. It's pretty sweeping. There are also, if you have not heard, new rules of geometry in several states because the propositions pass. Now with these new rules of geometry, you're going to have to rethink both your air conditioning systems, if they're outside the house, the size and shape of the tires on your vehicles, and whatnot. Frankly, there are so many potential issues that come up with this change in the rules of geometry that I'm not sure I can even begin to grasp what they might be. And also, I am reminded that sideways was changed to up. Now, in a lot of construction projects, and especially highway renovations, you're going to see that that affects the way we do things and the way we use certain mechanical devices. The implications here are pretty staggering, but I'm sure that Donald's people know how they can make this work so that all of us benefit. There is also, or there was in Colorado, a proposal for the first statewide single-payer system. And this was defeated, as you may know. Why was it defeated? Well, you have to understand what this proposal was about. It was going to guarantee all sorts of health services, but the single payer was going to be George Soros. Nobody else was going to have to pay for it, and he didn't like the idea of having to pay for health care for everybody in Colorado, and so he mounted a offense, it was kind of a defense actually, to get that proposal sidelined. He was successful. The most interesting of the proposals that I have seen to date deals with the issue of use of teleprompters. And this is something that was so controversial that it was only drafted as a constitutional amendment or a proposition in about 6 states and then was quietly removed. Now, I haven't completely understood the implications, and my people are still researching it, but to have use of teleprompters in your private life would be more than an inconvenience. It would be a big inconvenience, I guess, is what we were trying to say about that. So, let's talk about the future. Are there going to be reforms that emanate from this particular election cycle? Things that the people will demand because of what has happened? I think so. First one involves new political parties. New political parties. This year, of course, third parties had negligible impact in the ultimate voting. Despite the fact that American people seem to be interested in those new parties. The emails, for example, that have been mentioned in so many of these political conversations, they didn't support the major parties, but they didn't have access to the other candidates potentially out there who could better look after their agendas or potential agendas. So, are the new parties starting to line up? Well, yes, they are. The first party that I have been able to track information on is called Field the Barn. Field the Barn. Now, you know, I'm sure you know, that in essence, the Citizens United decision said corporations are just like people and they have these various rights. Well, Field the Barn is trying to move this in another direction, especially because they think dolphins and elephants in particular are probably, and octopi, are probably as smart as humans, and that they've known this for years. They have, and the rest of society should know it. Therefore, there should be a new Bill of Rights for creatures that are not currently voting. This doesn't mean that they would necessarily be given the vote, because the problem is some of them don't have the right kind of digitals to be able to use the current voting machine apparatus. Although, if you think back to what we saw in the beginning, and we're going to repeat it for you so that you'll be able to see how all this fits together. Apparently, in the future, the near future, we won't actually use any digitals to vote. We'll just tell that Siri-type device who we want to vote for, and it will be recorded. Not that there's any prospect there of additional election fraud. But anyway, the implications of what Field the Barn wants to do are widespread. I know, for example, that my own menagerie at home was absolutely not interested in the candidacies of either Mr. Trump or Ms. Clinton. And they would certainly have voted differently had they been given the opportunity and the mechanical apertures necessary to do this. But there are other parties that are pursuing a kind of different approach. You know that historically, there has been a separation of church and state here in these United States. Now, if you look back over the last 3 election cycles already, you realize that in the name of religion, there have been people saying what people should do politically, and it's not always spiritually correct. That is to say that certain of the alt-right elements are clothing themselves in religiosity, if you like big words. Now, though, they're going to take all this veneer about the separation of church and state and say, that just doesn't really make a difference anymore. That doesn't make a difference. And why? Well, because religion is the, politics is the real religion of America, as has been said so many times. The right or wrong, there's a church in California, for example, that's already openly looking for recruits. The Feel the Love at My County, Right or Wrong, Armed Church of the Last Days Political Choir. They've got a big online campaign to get recruits, and when you say recruits and are talking about a religion, it sounds a whole lot like a cult, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Well, they're not the only ones. A lot of people in this country worship money. And so now we're having somebody formally address that for what it really is. Come and worship the money, says this new brochure I received from the Temple of Greed. I'm not sure where they're located as such, but I am seeing more of their nomenclature all over the place. I have not seen too many of their temples yet, but apparently once they can start building, they have a prefab unit, so there will be more of these temples all across the country and in not very much more time. I mean, it's right there in the instant future. These are not the only new political parties. There are a lot of political parties, and since we have had Russian influence in the elections this year, the Russian government has decided to sort of make it formal. Right now, I have seen filing papers for a 501c3 for an organization that is called Rootin' for Putin. Their come on to people who might be donating to the campaign is a little odd. It says, here in America, bus service is dismal, casinos are badly lit, potholes and potheads are everywhere, and craft beer is destroying our heritage. Now, they're asking for a lot of money, but what bothers me is that I thought we had moved away from the heritage of swill as beer into a kind of an enlightened era. So they're not necessarily going to get along with all of the modern voters that we have in America. Now, before we get back and look at that initial brain hack again, to put all of this back in perspective, I want to talk to you about what some people are thinking in terms of this election being apocalyptic. That is to say, the end is relatively near. When people say this, they are usually talking about Donald Trump and his supporters, although some, of course, have said that yet another Clinton running for president already indicated that the end was relatively near. But what really proves this, in my mind, is something else that's happened here on the national stage, and that is the Chicago Cubs went to the World Series and actually won the World Series. Now, this has been predicted in ancient works, and let me just get right to what it says here. The Book of Revolutions. Some of you may know parts of this by heart, but I went to the exact wording that we're concerned with right now. And it says, I saw a vision, brethren, of a young bear, uniformed, his hopes dashed repeatedly, who sought repentance and prevailed. That sounds a lot like Donald Trump also. Dining on dogs of heat and driving small ovals over fences of great height, until at last, in a land of cleave, he rested. And then the punchline, this you're not going to like. Soon after did the earth on its axis shift, and darkness consumed all. Well, that sounds pretty end of time sort of thing to me. But I know a lot of you are not religious, so you wouldn't have ever been familiar with that little piece of literature. But you know Nostradamus, some of you, and Nostradamus has also talked about this a long time ago. You know how sometimes Nostradamus got names almost right, but not perfectly. Even so, you could look at them and you knew what he was talking about, and you could tell that he was right on. And here's one of the blank verses that I really think is right on target. And the Quab of Chautauqua, cast out 10 decades, with vengeance shall return and reign triumphant. But great misery for mankind follows the Quab's victory. Follows the Quab's victory. And from the sky will rain blood, milk, and all matter of Cardassia. Now that the blood and milk, I haven't seen that much of yet, but the Cardassia, that sounds like something that's very big in the social consciousness these days, and I think we've mentioned before that it's part of the consideration for representation on the Supreme Court. The Supremes could stand to have better dancers present, if not voting. You see what I'm saying? Now, I have given you some information that I don't know if it's going to help you. I don't know if it's going to scare you, but I hope that it informs you. And for my part, I think that no matter what happens, we'll all be resourceful enough to see the error of our ways, or the error of the ways of some other people, not necessarily us. Now, when we look at what the country has been through over these last 18 months, I think we can all say that it's time to relax and get back to what we were doing, especially if we were going to get down, because there's never enough time to get done with getting down. And that's why I come back here periodically to check in with you, to tell you what I've discovered that those in power don't want you to know about, period. They think it's dangerous for you to be fully informed about the stories behind the rumors about the stories and the back channel that talks about these things in terms that are even less clear. And so if that's not clear, I'm not sure what is, because all of you have the ability right now to turn off your TVs and to go outside and have a look at that blood and milk that has been pouring down outside in the last 30 seconds after I was telling you there isn't any. Because I guess I'm part of this total calamity. I hope I'll be able to come back, but maybe by sharing this information, I've helped to usher in that final denouement, or that deus ex machina, or whatever that is that they say in those literary gigantic statements. Anyway, this is Paul Colby talking to you on the station that brings you public affairs, that's Public Access, and I hope to see you again if we can get away with it. Until next time, get down.
I know it's not easy to say where it hurts. Those aren't your initials. this a long time ago, Frank. You're gonna get yourself in trouble if you don't, strike while the iron is hot. If you don't respond when opportunity knocks at your door. If you don't give it 126%. You know what I'm saying, Frank? Everyone's life has changed in numerous ways. It's hard to see through it. I know that. That Death Valley days. We're all entitled to a few mistakes. We're all entitled to some lucky breaks. But when you find yourself left sitting on a shelf, just head for the land of tall women and virgin pines. Let bygones be bygones. This applies to men and nations. Further down the road you'll pick up finger-licking good vibrations. We're all entitled to domestic bliss. But the procedures can be hit and miss. When you're hung out to dry, don't even bat an eye. Just take 2 aspirin and call somebody in the morning. Let bygones be bygones. This applies to men and nations. Further down the road you'll pick up finger-licking good vibrations.